Okay, cool. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the University Library Section's Technology in University Libraries, or Tools, subcommittee. And this is our webinar on infographics, and we're really glad you're here. If anybody's wondering who the Tools Committee is, you probably know us best from our CRNL News little tech bits blurbs that we put in every issue, giving you a new tool or something else helpful. And we also do these webinars, so we're happy you're here. Today we've got a really good presentation on infographics. Our presenters are Maria Nucili, she's a grad student at Wayne State, and Liz Johns, who is the Learning Design and Technologies Librarian at Johns Hopkins, and of course myself, my name's Emily Thompson, and I'm a studio librarian at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. So go ahead and type questions into the chat, and I'll do my best to answer them. We also have questions at the end, so if you put it into the chat now, I will keep track of those. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and get going. We're so glad that you're here, so thank you very much for coming. And Maria, I'm going to send you the ball.
Awesome, thank you. Can everyone hear me? Awesome, okay. So hey everyone, my name is Maria Nucili, and I'm currently getting an MLIS in Information Management at Wayne State. And today I'm going to be going over the basics of infographics, pretty much what they are, why they are effective, and most importantly, how infographics can be used. Then at the end, I'll go over a few library infographics I thought were pretty effective as a bit of inspiration. And the stuff I'm going to reference in this presentation is actually linked to in the Google Doc that Emily just sent out. So we actually have a copy of it that you're hopefully seeing right now, but the links aren't clickable from within there, so I would just follow the Google Doc. Okay, so let's get started. So what exactly are infographics? Here is a simple definition. An infographic uses visual cues to communicate information. Another way to think of it is pretty obvious. It's pretty much just information plus graphics. Beyond just representation, however, infographics also tell a story. They can be used to quickly introduce a topic visually, replacing a large chunk of text that a reader might otherwise overlook. And they're great for complex concepts and data sets as well, because when done correctly, they're easier to interpret and also have the ability to reveal insights that could otherwise disappear in a massive table. Moreover, they're also memorable. And they're great for online communication, whether you're going to upload them to your website or share them on social media. On the other hand, if you need print media, they're also easily utilized for posters and signage. So there are a lot of different ways you can express data visually as part of an infographic. I'm not going to read off this whole list because obviously you're doing that right now. But an infographic can utilize a lot of different elements, from graphs to maps to flowcharts to complex data visualizations or interactive dashboards. But with that said, there's no exact threshold at which something becomes an infographic. And by that, I mean an infographic can technically be as complex as this, or it can be as simple as this. So the history of infographics goes pretty far back. A lot of folks like to look back on early cave paintings as being proto-infographics. And also the art of map making has been key throughout history. There are also a few more recent historical examples of infographics that enthusiasts like to point to, which I'm going to go over in the next two slides. The first one is Florence Nightingale's 1856 visualization of military mortality in the Crimean War. And what she did here was she actually traced the causes of mortality back to poor hygiene and communicable disease, which was kind of overlooked at that point. And she was actually able to convince the government to invest more resources into maintaining the health of their troops. And the visual impact that was represented in this graphic undoubtedly definitely influenced the decision of the government. Another much cited example is this visualization of Napoleon's Russian campaign of 1812, which, as you can see, resulted in pretty horrifying military losses. The width of the gold path represents the outward-going troops, and the black path represents the returning troops. And geography, time, temperature, and direction are also represented in the graphic. And this one has actually been cited by many experts as being the best statistical graph ever drawn. So why are infographics so effective? I like this quote from art critic John Berger, and he says, "Seeing comes before words. The child looks and recognizes before it can speak." So why is this relevant? Well, there are a whole lot of issues that affect information retention. First of all, people are busy. Most people don't necessarily have the time to read through a long document to determine whether or not it's useful to them. And even if they do end up doing that, they might not even have the attention span to make anything stick. And as a society, we're all probably suffering from information overload, whether it's coming from staring at a screen all day at work, or the fact that most of us are constantly plugged into the world via smartphones or whatever other media that we choose to use. So if we are going to try to get a message across, one of the best ways we can do it is through visual communication. Humans are visual learners, which means our brains process visuals a lot faster than text. Studies actually suggest that humans only retain 10% of information when listening to somebody speak, and 20% of information when reading. But when images are used in combination with a data set, information retention can increase up to 80%. So in short, an image is worth 1,000 words, and a well-designed infographic can replace a long spreadsheet of numbers, while hopefully being more memorable to boot. So moving on, how can infographics be used? We know they're an effective form of communication, but how can we specifically leverage their power for libraries? There are a lot of ways, actually, that libraries can utilize infographics. They can be used to share research or market library resources. They're also a great way to highlight library accomplishments, and likewise can also work to enhance advocacy or outreach materials, stuff like that. Another great use for them, and one of my favorites, is teaching information literacy. So if you look online, there are a lot of great resources for inspiration. And in the next few slides, I'm actually going to go over a few examples that stood out for me when I was putting stuff together for this presentation. A lot of them were pulled from a great website. It's called libraryandesign.org, as well as other people's Pinterest boards. And we've included links in the Google Doc to those sites that we'll be sharing with you along with the other resources that Emily and Liz gathered. And I'm just going to briefly cover these for time's sake, but if you want to spend more time with the examples, just take a look at the Google Doc. So it looks like we might be having a volume problem. Is anyone having a problem hearing the presentation? Okay, maybe just a couple of people. Okay, great. Then I'm just gonna wrap up here. So anyway, back to the examples. So here is an infographic from the University of Maryland that's highlighting the use of different library resources. It's a memorable way to express the impact the library has on students and faculty at the university. And it is citing usage statistics to do that, from resource access to reference questions. It's eye-catching and would make a really nice promotional sign or an image to share on social media as well. So I really like the idea behind this one. It's from DeSales University in Pennsylvania. And content-wise, it's similar to the last one, but it's actually mapping library usage onto the actual floor plan of the library, which is a neat idea for quantifying the use of physical space. Next up, we have this one from Marymount University in Wisconsin, and it's not data-based, but it does provide a nice way to guide users through interlibrary loan. I think breaking it up into 4 easy steps with the graphics is a really memorable way to present the service. Here's one about complying with public access policy that is from Cornell. And again, that breaks up something that's a little complicated into 4 easy steps. And it's a great resource for student researchers and anyone teaching information literacy. And lastly, we have one from ProQuest that's visualizing usage statistics after introducing a new platform. Something like this could easily work at an academic library to emphasize something like the effect of a new discovery tool or some kind of other new service that's being offered. So that's all I have for you today. Thanks for watching, and as a reminder, you can access the Google Doc for more examples of library infographics. And Liz is up next, so I am going to pass the ball to her.
Thank you very much, Maria. That was excellent. And Liz, it's off to you.
Okay, can you guys hear me okay? Okay, great. My name is Liz Johns. I'm the Learning Design and Technologies Librarian at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland. And for my part of today's webinar, I'm going to discuss how to strategically plan an infographic using a particular theory and model that's been written about in the literature. So Maria reviewed a little bit about what an infographic is and how they can be used, and I really like some of those examples that she showed. So I'm going to try to build on that a little bit by discussing how to go about creating an infographic and really focusing on that planning process. So my goal for the next couple minutes is to help you all take a strategic theory-based approach to developing an infographic. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the constructivist learning theory. I promise not to spend too much time on it, just a few minutes just to introduce you to it. And then I'll introduce the SOI model. So forgive that typo in the slides. It's not SOE, it's SOI. I work with the School of Education at Hopkins, so I'm typing SOE all the time, so I apologize for that typo, but it is SOI model. And then I'll talk about how to use the model to plan an infographic. And it's something that I do a lot because really you don't want to jump into an infographic just by going directly to a design tool and starting to design it in the tool. It really helps if you take the time to strategically plan it out before you go into a design tool, before you start playing around with the graphics and all the fun things that Emily's going to talk about after me. You want to make sure that you kind of have a plan going into it. It'll make it a little easier. So to do that, I use I'm going to talk today about the constructivist learning theory, which basically means can construct meaning from well-designed materials. So if you can design a good infographic, whether it's instructional or promotional, somebody looking at it should be able to get meaning from it without any intervention from an actual human. We hope that whatever kind of infographic you design can stand well on its own. So just to get the general idea of constructivist learning theory, it really emphasizes on big concepts, and it goes along the idea that learning is interactive and builds upon what people already know. So depending on the context of what kind of information you're trying to put out there, you can make some reasonable assumptions about what people know already, but that might be different depending on your audience, depending on the information, but it's okay to make a few assumptions about what you think people want to know based on your content. And then the constructivist learning theory also emphasizes that the process is as important as the product. So you're designing this product, this infographic, and the process of designing it is just as important as what actually ends up on that paper or digital image, website, whatever, at the end. And it's really the idea that people are able to construct new information, the learner's able to make sense of the material, and they can both retain the information. So for example, they can write down what they remember from your infographic, and they can transfer the information. So they can take that information that they got from the infographic, remember it, and transfer it so they can answer a question about it later or explain it to somebody else. So there's a lot of good examples about how constructivist learning theory works and what that all means in Meyer's article. And I'll have a reference to that at the end, but I encourage you to read it. It's interesting, and I think it gave me some new perspective on learning theories, and it's one that I really like to use in other contexts as well. But it's a quick read, and there's some good examples to help you kind of wrap your head around that a little bit. So Meyer's SOI model takes that idea of constructivist learning theory and of selecting, organizing, and integrating information. So this is basically a cognitive process that students or your users or viewers are going through. When they're getting information, they try to figure out what's important. They select the information on their own. They organize it in their own head and then integrate it when asked to do so. So Meyer applies this theory to instructional design, and I'm going to take this SOI model and apply it to how we can design infographics. Development, we're going to select the important, we as the infographic creators are going to select the important information. We're going to organize it, and then we'll integrate it to help the user make sense of it and use the information in the infographic. So we're going to take this constructivist learning theory and apply it to designing infographics. So the first step of this process is that selection. The first thing you should do is think about the audience and the goals for the information that you're trying to put out there. You want to think about who are you designing for, what do they need to know, what do you know about them, what assumptions can you reasonably make, and what don't you know about them. So you want to take whatever information you have and keep that in mind at the beginning of the process of developing an infographic. It's really focus on who are the people that this is for, and what kind of information do they need. And that will help you select the most important information because as the people who are selecting that information and putting it into an infographic, you want to make sure that you can help your users and your viewers really hone in on what's important. So you really want to keep your infographics focused. You want to pick a reasonable scope, eliminate anything that's irrelevant, and be really concise because really less is more. That's kind of the point of infographics. We want to cut down on big chunks of text, on giving people too much information. We want them to be able to process information more quickly and more easily. So the less can be more, so you want to find that good, reasonable scope and really just hone in on what's important. So after you've figured out who the people are, what information you want, then you're going to organize it. Every infographic should have the same kind of structure no matter what kind you're doing. So Maria showed examples of, or she talked on the page, different kinds of things that you could turn into infographics, timelines, handouts, things for instruction or things for marketing. No matter what kind of thing you're doing, they should have the same structure. Everything should have a title and an introduction, you have your body, and then your conclusion. Typically when I design infographics, my conclusion often is just my contact information or any references, follow-up links, resources, something like that. So we're not talking about putting an essay into an infographic. But these are kind of the main components that should be involved here. So it's really your job to organize that information in the infographic into something that makes sense. You want to make it as easy as possible for your viewer to figure out what's going on and select that important information, remember it, retain it, and then be able to transfer it. When you're organizing your information for the infographic, I strongly recommend that you create an outline first and also a prototype. I'll often stand up, get next to my whiteboard, and start drawing everything out on my whiteboard before I jump into a design tool. Because messing around the design tools can get frustrating sometimes, especially if you're new to designing infographics. Even though a lot of the tools are easy to use, it can get frustrating if you don't have an idea in your head what it's going to look like at the beginning. You want to make sure you have that logical structure. Focus on outlines and bullets rather than large chunks of text. Try to pull out some signal words and headings, things that will give clues to your user as to what's important. So you're making that selection, you're organizing things, and you're making it as easy as possible for your users to get the information. And then the last part of the model is integration. Emily's going to talk a little bit more about this in a few minutes, specifically on graphic design. But that integration part is where it all comes together, where you start thinking about your design aspects, you think about the logic and what it's going to look like, and you really want to make sure that you help the learner make sense of the material. So you're going to start thinking about, okay, what more is needed? I know who this is for, I know what the information is for, I've organized the information, but how do I really give it some meaning? Do I need to put in examples? What kind of images do I need? Do I need models? Do my images need captions? Can I put multimedia in here? One of the cool things about infographics is that you can make them so that they're printed out or they're hosted online. And when you have them hosted online, you can add in some multimedia videos, GIFs, things like that. So you want to think about that as you're designing this. And you also want to consider how is it going to be presented or distributed. Do you want it to be printable? At the beginning, when I first started playing around with infographics a few years ago, that thought didn't really occur to me until someone asked me to print one out for them, and it wasn't the right shape and size. It didn't print very well. So now anytime I design an infographic, I make sure that I size it before I get started to fit on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper or half a sheet of paper so that most of the time they are hosted online, but if I want to print them out, it's easy for me to do that. And then you also want to think, do I need it to be single-sided, double-sided? Do I want links to be embedded in there? Because those can all change how you organize and how you integrate your content when you're designing it. And I do want to put out a disclaimer that if you're using an infographic tool, like PictoChart or Venngage or something like that, it's not going to automatically create the infographic for you. Simply taking your content and adding some images and throwing it into a tool doesn't make it an infographic. The reason why I like this SOI model is that it kind of forces you to really make sure that you're creating a true and strong infographic that makes sense and is useful. The tool isn't going to do that for you. You still need that cognitive process. And to go through that cognitive process, I created a worksheet that you can download yourself if you'd like to in your infographic. So if you go to that URL, you'll get a worksheet. It's a Google Doc that you can download or you can make a copy of it. And you can plan out through that SOI model, helps you plan everything out and get all that on paper before you actually jump into a tool and start that graphic design process. So I encourage you to do that. It's nice to be able to organize that way, creating an outline or using that worksheet before you jump in. And I also put the link to our resources on there that I think has gone out already, but I put it in my slides just in case. And the recommended reading, Mayer's SOI model, the citation is there, so when you get the recording, you can refer back to this later. So now I'm going to turn it over to Emily, and she's going to focus more on graphic design concepts. And so that really plays into my process of the integration at the end. So hopefully Emily will have some good tips for you. Well, I know she has some good tips for you on all of that fun graphic design stuff. So I threw the ball to Emily.
And can everybody hear me and see my slides? They're purple and gray. Cool. I love it when WebEx works perfectly, which is most of the time, but it's awesome. All right, so my name is Emily Thompson. I'm studio librarian at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, which means that I actually teach students how to do graphic design and video editing and making infographics and that stuff. And so I really took, the tack I took for this particular presentation was the trouble that I see people who have very little graphic design experience and kind of where they get hung up. Which more often than not is on picking colors and choosing fonts. It's amazing how stressful those two things can be. And so I have some really specific tools to talk about to help you kind of get over that hump, because really you only have two goals with an infographic. It needs to look nice and it needs to be easy to read. And for anybody who wants to make fun of my fonts, yes, that is just Calibri, because sometimes boring is okay. So a lot of times with color, I see a lot of people that are just like, I don't want it to be ugly. I don't know what looks pretty. I don't know how to pick colors. And the way that a lot of the tools are set up these days is you literally have millions of colors to choose from, and that can get very upsetting to people. And so I'm a big fan of Adobe's Cooler, which is just color.adobe.com. It is one of the few things that Adobe actually puts out there for free. And when you get there and look at it, you'll see something that looks like this. And each of those little handles, you can grab it and spin it to a different color, and it will take all of the rest of them with them. And over here in the corner, you have a choice of various color rules, such as analogous, monochromatic, triad, complementary, compound, etc. And whatever color rule you choose, it'll keep those handles in there. So if you're like, I really want to do complementary colors, and you start with a purple you really like, you're only going to get oranges or yellows. And then if you go down to blue, you'll get oranges, or if you go up to orange, you'll get blues. And it's a really easy way to get a bunch of colors that you know go together, as opposed to just, I don't know if this goes together, maybe, maybe not, maybe I like it and everyone else will hate it. And you can manage to do that, especially if you're doing custom, but you know, It's subjective. But the main thing that I like about this is under each of those color swatches that you get, it gives you both the RGB codes and the hex codes. So RGB stands for red, green, blue, and that's how printers choose their inks. So if you're going to do something that's going to be printed, you want to pay attention to the RGB codes. And then the hex codes are for web. So if something's going to go out on the internet, the hex code is what all HTML or CSS thinks that that color looks like. So this gives you a chance to get that exact color that you want, rather than trying to like match it going back and forth between Cooler and PowerPoint or whatever you're using to do your infographic. And the nice thing about knowing what these codes are and what to look for is that they show up literally everywhere. So this is Canva. If you click on colors, it gives you the option to type in a hex code. PowerPoint does RGB sliders, but you can type in the numbers on each of those choices. So both Mac and Windows, they put them in slightly different places. Adobe has both RGB and hex codes, so if you're learning Illustrator, they give you all the things. Anything that's a web-based tool is probably going to go with a hex code. But either way, they're really, really, really useful things to know what to look for so that you can find it. Yeah. However, I still see people that get really upset because they're like, I don't know what looks good. This is really hard. And people get a lot of anxiety about things looking ugly, which is mostly just, it's probably not going to look ugly. I guarantee you that. It's unlikely that it's going to look ugly. But my when in doubt solutions are grayscale plus something bright, or black and white plus your school colors. And the only time black and white plus school colors kind of doesn't work is if one of your school colors is navy blue. But just pick the other one, right? But these examples that I have down here, grayscale plus a blue, black and white plus an orange, grayscale plus pink, you pick something like that and it automatically looks pulled together without you having to worry about it too much. It's also kind of my favorite fashion palette, if we tell the truth, because it always looks like you tried and it's never very difficult. The other thing that gives people stress are, of course, text. Now this is an infographic, so you should not have a ton of text on your infographic. Otherwise, it's not quite the right thing. But I do try and advise, especially with fonts, try not to overthink it. And while I was researching for this particular presentation, I found these tools, wordmark.it and flippingtypical.com. Just let me type this in. And because I'm a very visual person, and what these do is if you have Flash installed, they will go and look at all of the fonts you have stored on your computer, and they will just, you type a word up in them, and you can see how that word looks in all of the fonts, which helps you, rather than trying to be like, well, I don't know, this one looks okay, maybe not. Pick your main word, pick part of your title, and then you can see how it looks in all of them, and you can be like, that looks awesome, or like in the case of this one, the one that's in the second row, third from the bottom, that doesn't look like something I can read. Maybe we don't use that one. But it gives you a lot of options. The other, just some vocabulary for the font nerds. You will see a lot of stuff, especially when you're trying to narrow down fonts. The biggest vocabulary that I see is serif versus sans serif. So those of you who speak French, sans means doesn't have. So yes, Emmeline just mentioned that there's also defont.com or 1001 Font website, and those are also really great. Those are great places to see fonts. What I like about Flipping Typical is you can see what the words look like. But Defont and 1001 Fonts are also excellent places to grab things. And there's one called What the Font, where if you pull in a picture of your font, you may be able to figure out what it is. For that restaurant that has a really cool sign, and you're like, that's the one I want. That would be What the Font. And I do not remember if it's actually What the Font or if it's What the Font, but if you type What the Font into Google, you'll get it. Anyway, so serif means that it has feet, and sans serif means that it does not have feet. It looks like I lost my Luminari font at some point when I was making these. So this is not Luminari there. But serif, the most famous one, is Times New Roman. Everybody knows Times New Roman. And if you look at the T and at the base of it, at the corners and at the base, you'll see these little hooks, so feet. So if it's a serif font, it has those. Whereas sans serif are rounder. The most famous one is, of course, Comic Sans, or Arial, or Helvetica. They're all sans serif. There used to be this rule of thumb that like serif was better for print, but I think we're a little bit beyond that at this point, mainly because there are just so many fonts. But pick the ones that you like. Try not to go too crazy. As long as you can read it, you're probably going to be pretty good. However, do note, going back to that, go back. As we can see now and again, those mistakes just make for a better lesson, but we all know that. And then you go to another conference and they don't have those fonts on their computer, they will not show up on your PowerPoint. So if you're using a lot of really crazy fonts, make sure that you've made a PDF of it. And Rebecca just said something about serif fonts for dyslexia. I'm going to get to that in a minute. Sure, if that's 100% positive, but thinking about why those fonts were designed is always a good idea. Anyway, the other thing that stresses people out, especially when I'm trying to teach people to do academic posters, which if we think about it are just very large infographics, the students are always very concerned about what size font or what point size. And it really doesn't mean anything, especially if you're going to get it printed. It just means it's the height of the font. So in print, 72 points equals 1 inch. However, if you're talking about a screen or a projector, who knows, really? And if you're trying to do like a very large PowerPoint and then shrink it down to something, like you're thinking your PowerPoint in terms of like 3 feet long, and then you're going to shrink it down to something that goes on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, point size is irrelevant. It is completely irrelevant. Just think in terms of bigger numbers means bigger font, smaller numbers means smaller font, and always print out a copy before you send it off to the printer or send it off to people so you can kind of get an idea of what it looks like. But they should not be stressful. And so this is the example of that. So this is what Arial looks like at 88, Garamond at 54, Luminari actually being Calibri. And you can see it means a great deal of different things. And most importantly with point size, 72 is only how tall it is. It has nothing to do with how wide it is. So you can have something that's at 72, so it's about 1 inch tall, but it can also be, 3 inches long for each letter, and that's going to be confusing. Yes, Emmeline has a really good tip that if you save in PNG instead of JPEG, you'll have better printing choices. And the bigger that you get, the less pixelated it's going to go, because JPEGs are lossy and PNGs are lossless. So whatever it is in the PNG, it's not going to get any worse if you get any bigger, whereas JPEG cares a lot about its pixels. Yeah. So when in doubt, graphic design suggestions are no more than 3 fonts. And really easy ways to do is pick one that's a serif and one that's a sans serif. Pick one such as Arial or Helvetica and then do bold, italic, and regular of that same font, because you know they're going to be friends because they're all in the same family. And yes, you should only think about 3, and a bold one and a not bold one are 2. So think a lot about legibility over fun. When I see a lot of infographics, particularly when students are making them or people who don't have a lot of graphic design experience, they will always pick something that's just wacky because it looks cool and it's all curlicues and everything. And when you're trying to get information across in a very succinct way, curlicues are weird. To get back to Rebecca's point, everybody makes fun of Comic Sans. I used to make fun of Comic Sans. There's that wonderful McSweeney's thing about I'm Comic Sans, because it became kind of the font that everybody makes fun of. Yes, it is not safe for work. Thank you, Devin. I abbreviated the title because it's not safe for work. And it is funny, and everybody likes to make fun of Comic Sans because it kind of became the go-to font for people who didn't know any graphic design and just wanted to do something cute. But I did find this out a little while ago that it was designed for people with dyslexia. So there's something about Comic Sans that does not flip and twist and do the dyslexia things as much as other people. So if your readers could be helped by using it, school the haters on accessibility. So if someone says, oh, why are you using Comic Sans? Tell them the truth. Pick your fonts with an expectation of reasons. You're not just picking it because it looks pretty. That's actually my biggest graphic design and video editing advice that I give to any of our students. Pick it not because you think it's cool or you need a better reason than just because you think it's cool. For example, the top font here, I picked it because it looks cool. It's also very legible, and also I really liked how that U looked. And so it looked like a fancy font without being too fancy. I have reasons for why I picked it, rather than just deciding, let's do this because it's pretty. Especially with something like an infographic where you're trying to get all of your points across without making too much of a mess. And Emmeline, also, honestly, I don't know. I didn't read the whole, they didn't go into too much detail, the particular thing that I was informed about this, but that may be why. That kind of makes sense. I don't know enough about dyslexia to be able to diagnose it, but I would be fascinated to find out. So thus ends our presentations. We have about 22 minutes for questions. So if you have any questions, please feel free to just stick them in the chat, and we are more than happy to answer anything you'd like to know. Thank you all very much for coming. And yeah. Oh, good. Thank you. So Liz, if you want to go ahead and turn on your mic.
I tend to use PictoChart to create infographics. I have also used Infogram before, but I tend to just stick with PictoChart because I'm familiar with it, and I've been using it for a few years now, and I like the templates, and I like the way it's easy to create. So that's typically what I use, but there are tons out there. I use both the free and the paid version. My library, I convinced my library to get the education version of PictoChart, which I like because you can download different size file formats and different types of files. With the free version of PictoChart, you can still download, but the quality isn't always as good. So I use the free version for like my volunteer work, but I do have the education account for my professional work.
Someone asked up here about advice for faculty who want to turn their research into infographics to then put out on social media to help get a greater audience for their research. So, like, we have a new faculty group here on campus here, and we are starting to talk to faculty members about that a little bit more. It's an interesting concept. Part of it is the age-old question of getting academics to talk to a non-academic audience, so it all filters into that particular question. We'll see where we go moving forward. I think that once you can get them, the important thing about infographics is distilling it down, right? So that is a good exercise for anything. And once you can get it distilled down, then you can start to talk about graphic design and moving it into other places. Liz and Maria, do you have any thoughts on that?
I haven't worked with their research into infographics. I think I have a 3-part workshop that I use with other librarians on how to turn their data into infographics, but it's been library data that we've used, so we haven't really used it helping faculty turning research into infographics. But I do this 3-part workshop series that I do with librarians is an extended version of what I talked about today, using the model to plan an infographic, and then I have a workshop on using PictoChart, and then a 3rd workshop on taking that content and putting it. But to the second part of the question about extending the impact of their research on social media, that's something that I'd love to have more conversations about, and there are a few other librarians in my department that I think are working on that kind of thing with data visualization with faculty and working with data management and our data management department to do that kind of thing, but that's not something that I've been involved with.
Someone asked about correct sizes for social media, and Christy Cho pointed people towards Canva that does actually scale things for different social media platforms. I have found that most social media, unless it's ginormous, they can scale it down so it fits. But if you're really worried about it looking good, squares, you can never go wrong with a square. They fit in the timelines a little bit better, and they're less likely to be run off. I mean, they now all work so that if you click on the square, it'll open it up and you can see the whole thing. But if you don't want people to have to click on it, squares.
Yeah, I have to agree about that. When I was looking at infographics, you know, trying to find examples for this presentation, a lot of them I saw were really, really long, which makes them hard to view on a mobile device.
It also makes them more difficult to print.
Yes, yes. So a square or, you know, anything that's the dimensions of a sheet of paper, I would say are good.
Yeah, the longer it is, the more weird the social media site will choose the section that it'll put up. If it's really, really long, it's going to pick something weird in the middle. So if you do have something that you want to do really, really long, that's more appropriate for like a blog post or its own individual website where you can actually scroll through it. Yeah, I'm less familiar with Tumblr, but again, squares. Andrea asks about matching font with the style of the graphics. It's very much an aesthetic choice. So if you're, although, you know, I'm not a frou-frou person, so if you've got really flowery, brightly colored, intense graphics, that's probably not the time to go and choose a really flowery, curly-hued font, just because it's too much. So I like contrast. Really flowery thing here, really simple thing over here, and put it together and you got something interesting. Yes, Emmeline, you were right. Facebook, sorry about that, will show you a mobile preview of what people will see if you schedule your post, so you can see what to do. I apologize for that. My email is up and it's reminding me that I have to go beyond the desk soon. Excuse me.
Kind of related to Andrea's question about matching font. I struggle a little bit more with matching colors, but I have a tool on my computer. It's called a digital color meter, where you can hover your mouse over a color, over an image, font, anything really, anything that's on your screen, and it'll give you the hex codes, the Rgb codes, Adobe Rgb, so you can get the right colors. You can match your font to colors in a graphic. So if you have a graphic first that you want to match your font color to, that's a nice tool.
Yeah.
Color schemes I also struggle with a little bit, but I love Pinterest for coming up with color schemes. If you go onto Pinterest and you just look for color palette or color pattern or something like that, you get all sorts of good color schemes that you can steal from to make your own colors, or to make your own schemes for your infographic if you're trying to get a little bit more creative than the just grayscale with the black and white with your school colors, which is a great lot of fun with it.
And you can always type them into Cooler so you can kind of see what they look like together. Or most tools have an eyedropper tool in there somewhere. And if you're having trouble because like you're clicking off of your PowerPoint, I make infographics in PowerPoint. If you're clicking off of PowerPoint or you're clicking off of Illustrator or you're clicking off of Windows and the eyedropper goes away, take a screenshot of whatever you want, whatever color you're going for, and put it in as a photo into whatever tool you're using. Grab the color and then delete the picture. I'm really good at cheating things. Yeah. So, well, I'm going to let you guys think if you have any other questions. In the meantime, I'm going to put a link to a survey because we are librarians and we do like our surveys. And so we would love to for you to let us know what you thought of it. But we have another few minutes for questions because we're running a little bit early. Yes, colors opposite each other on the color wheel really do pop. That's why red and green for Christmas is so popular. It's because they're right across from each other. And that's why I recommend the Adobe Color Wheel, the Cooler, is because if you're thinking you would like a red and a green, you can put in complementary and then go to red, and then you can kind of tweak it to get off of Christmas red and Christmas green into like a nice scarlet and I don't know, chartreuse that's across from it. And they'll, so you can tweak it away from the complementary color that we know and love into something that's in there but a little bit different. So that's great advice, Emmeline. Same thing with yellow and purple, which always looks to me like Mardi Gras, but then you can kind of get into lavender and lemon, which does not look like Mardi Gras. Yeah. The main thing that I want to get across with color is it's not as hard as you think it is, and sometimes not as hard as you're making it. I mean, we all manage to get up every morning and put on clothes, and very rarely does anyone come up to us and go, you know, those colors don't go together. So
I tell my husband that all the time.
Yeah, so in general, you manage to dress yourself every day and not be horrifically clashed, and it's the same thing for an infographic. So if you have a particular like shirt that you love with a great pattern, go with it. Take a picture of it and throw it into Illustrator or PowerPoint and use the eyedropper to steal those colors. Steal colors. Steal lots of colors. Yeah. I don't know, Maria, did you have anything you wanted to wrap up with?
No, I think we pretty much covered everything.
Okay. Well, unless there are any other questions, which we'll give it another minute, we're very grateful that you came, and we hope that you got something else. Apparently I had cute gray outfits from the collective. Good. Yeah, my favorite color is gray. I can't help it. But we really hope that you appreciated this and you got something out of it. Just in case, I'm going to do a shameless plug here because we're hiring. So if anybody's thinking, wow, Emily's job sounds really cool, you could have it. So I'm going to go ahead and throw a link in there because we're hiring for a couple of very interesting positions. So if anyone's looking for a job, we would love to hear from you. Otherwise, there will be a recording of this. I think it usually takes about a week to get it together. And we can also send out the presentation slides. They are not currently in the resources. No, I'm not leaving. We're expanding. So the slides are not currently in the resources, but we can send them out at the same time that we send out the recording. If people are after that, it's easy to attach things to that. Otherwise, thank you all very much for coming, and yeah, let us know if you have any other questions. Our contact information is in the resource form, and